In this video, I will show you how to create a Devin Jatho reel, and this is actually part 3 of this series, and I'm really excited. There's some really cool effects in this. But before I begin this video, if you're an editor that wants to get more clients and want to grow to 5K a month, then this is for you. In the Social Creator Club Pro, I just launched a series called Behind the Scenes Sales, where I literally show you how to get clients from scratch. Not only that, there's also an exclusive Devin Jatho deep dive. So click the link in the description to join, and then let's jump into it. Let's go through the example first. So we have a text animation. We already created that in the previous video, but I'm still gonna recreate that anyway. Then we have these numbers popping up, 1, 2, 3, an extra icon animation. These will turn into another color. Then the number 1 will get highlighted and centered. We have a icon animation with a line, and that line goes to more icons that eventually also go down. Then we have this really cool camcorder effect, which of course we're also going to recreate. And also see that there's actually some adjustment in the colors. It's a bit more bright. So let's get this party starting. I'm going to turn everything off, and I'm already in a new composition. You can create a composition by clicking the composition icon and then just selecting Social Media Portrait HD, which is a vertical format. Press OK, and then we'll have a new composition. You can of course also just drag your A-roll footage into the create composition button, and then it will also create a composition. Now, like last time, I am using this footage just as a background. And for the text animation, I'm just gonna go to the text tool, and I'm just gonna type in my text here. I'm gonna select this, and I'm gonna make sure that the fill is set to white, centered, and also the leading, which is basically the spacing between it, is set to auto, maybe a bit bigger. Now for the bottom text, I'm just gonna select that, and I'm just gonna make this black, and I'm just gonna make this really bold, maybe using this font. And we can even make it bigger by selecting it and then dragging it out, and then adding a bit more spacing. And then we can also change the color here to, for example, like a greenish color, something like that. So we have our text. Now to animate this, I'm just going to use a standard effect in the effects and presets, which is called blur in by word. And we can just double click, and it will just apply it to our animation. Just press U to see all the keyframes. Let's move these keyframes a bit, and let's time it a bit. So let's make it like around 1 second. If I play it now, it should be quite cool. I think it's still a bit too harsh, and we can adjust it by just going into the text and then changing the blur amount. So basically it will blur, as you can see. So I'm just gonna drag this down, so basically it comes a bit less far. And let's see what this looks like. It's already a bit more smooth, as you can see. It's also more a vertical blur, and that's because these values are different, right? We see 35 and 130. If we set them to 35 both, so unlink it and just set 35, there we go. We get a more even blur, and it's also a bit more smooth. So I like that. Now for the end animation of this text, we literally just cut it off by hitting Alt bracket, and I'm using Alt right bracket, which is the key on most keyboard next to the Enter key. And I'm also going to go to align and of course center this, so it's a bit more centered. There we go. Now it's cut off, so we're going to go to the next scene, and here I'm just going to add the cards. And to create these cards, I'm just going to go into the rectangle tool, hold your mouse down and make a rounded rectangle tool. Then I'm going to click on fill. I'm going to set it on gradient. Okay, go into the gradient tool by clicking on this color, and let's see what we're going to do. Maybe like a dark black, dark grayish to even darker gray. So there's just a bit of gradient. It doesn't have to be much. It always adds a bit of spice. So stroke, maybe something like this, like a whitish, maybe off-white, something like this. And then 5 pixels, we can always adjust this later on. So let's just drag this out now. We have a really cool card already. I'm gonna set the stroke maybe a bit less. So maybe to like 2.5, maybe 3. Let's see, 2, maybe 3. That works. Let's select this now. Let's drag it up, and I'm gonna change the size here. I'm gonna make it a bit less high, and you can do this by going into these shape properties. If you don't see this, then you can also go into the rectangle path, and you can see it here. And why this is important to use this feature: if you don't use this feature and you scale it, you will also scale the corners, and it will look weird. As you can see, look at those corners. It looks horrible. It's the #1 way to see if someone is mediocre or a great editor. Now you also see this line here. This is the gradient. I'm also going to move this a bit, maybe something like this. There we go. And it's subtle, but it will add a bit of depth, right? I'm going to maybe resize it still a bit, so there's a bit more room, something like that. That's cool. Now what I'm going to do is basically add a number here. 1. Let's select this, make this white. Let's make it a bit bigger. Maybe use a different font here, something like that. Let's move this. There we go. Now the trick here is because I already know I'm gonna use more numbers, we can already animate this part and then we can just duplicate it, change the numbers, call it a day. Now for the icon, I actually still have this icon, although it's black, so we need to go to effects and presets and add a invert to this. There we go. Now, of course, if you're a pro member, you will get this project file and all the assets. But if you're a free member of the Social Creator Club, then you also get the assets that I'm working with. So if you are not in the free community yet, do join. Let's scale this down a bit by pressing S and let's move this. I'm gonna make it a bit more small and I'm gonna put it a bit more below, something like this. I'm just gonna select these 3 layers that we basically created. Let's move this to the start. So first these blocks will animate in and then later on this will animate in. Now what I'm gonna do basically is I'm just gonna link the icon to the number 1, press P for position, set a position keyframe and then go a bit further. Let's move it up. So the alignment is a bit better as you can see. Now of course select this, right click, keyframe assistant easy ease or hit F9. Of course add motion blur to this by hitting the motion blur icon. And what I'm also going to do is basically mask it a bit so it's a bit faded in. This is a really good way to blend it more. So I'm just going to go to the rectangle tool. Again, hold your mouse on this tool to change it. And let's select the rectangle tool. Make sure the mission icon is selected. And I'm just going to drag this like this. Set this mask to subtract, press F for feather, and let's feather it out. Now when we press V, we can double click on this mask and we can change the sizing a bit, maybe feathering it even out a bit more. And it's a really cool way to make this a bit more smooth, right? That's cool. Now, of course, I'm gonna fade the icon in. So press T for transparency, set the keyframe for opacity, and let's drag this out a bit. And let's set this to 0. So it will basically fade in while it's animated in like that. Let's play this real quick. Not smooth enough, of course. So let's select these keyframes from the position, go into the graph editor. I'm going to zoom in a bit and let's select this one, drag it out a bit, and this one too. Doesn't have to be too much. Maybe I'm also going to make it a bit more slow. So selecting both these keyframes, moving it a bit, and that's already way better. Really nice. Now we still have to animate it in, of course. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to link this number 1 to our shape layer and press P for position and set a keyframe. I'm going to drag this out and let's make sure that this is moved to the bottom by holding shift. And of course, easy ease it. Let's make this a bit more slow and let's go into the graph editor, dragging this last keyframe more to the left, and that's really smooth. I really like this. I'm really happy with this. This actually looks really nice in my opinion. Now, of course, we need to make the other ones, but before we do that, I'm also gonna animate the background, so it basically highlights it, right? And we can do this by going into the shape layer, contents, rectangle, and there we see our gradient fill. Now we can just set a keyframe for the colors, and we can just go a bit further. For example, here, going into the edit gradient tab, and then we can just change these colors. So for example, we can just set it to like a dark greenish. I wouldn't animate it too far because otherwise it will look weird, and maybe keep this one to like a dark greenish, not too much, maybe something like this. And now, as you can see with the keyframes, it will go from black to this greenish. I think that looks really cool. Now, what you might have noticed is that it's actually a bit transparent. You don't have to do this, it's just a bug now, but you can change it here in the opacity. So basically, if you set this to 100%, it will look different, of course. I think having it see-through actually does look cool. So I set this to 56%. Of course, we need more of these. We now only have 1. And I'm gonna just do that by just selecting these layers, holding shift. So you first select the shape layer and then hold shift and click on mission. So we selected them all. Then press Command D or Control D on Windows. And then we have our next one. Now, of course, we need to move it. Normally, I would just say, hey, just move it, right? But what happens now is we're gonna set a new keyframe. First, what I'm gonna do is move these to the top. So just drag them to the top. So the layer order is a bit nicer. Then just select the shape layer, press P for position. As you can see, we have the position here. Now, the funny thing is because everything is linked anyway, we can just go to this keyframe, make sure that it's selected, click on position. So it will select both these keyframes. And again, make sure that you're on top of one of these keyframes. And then we can just move this over by holding shift. Or you can go to align and then center. That's perfect. And of course, I'm gonna do this once more. So selecting these layers by holding shift, duplicating it, moving it to the top, pressing P on our shape layer, and selecting position, moving this over by holding shift. And now we try to have a bit of the same distance between each other. Now I'm going to select all the shape layers, press P for position. I'm just going to offset this a bit. So basically the first one pops in first. Let's select the second one and let's move this a bit. You can also change the length of it if you want. I think just having it one frame after it should be fine. And then the last one is the top one. Select that and also move this a bit. So basically the start animation is a bit offset, then the icon comes in and then they all turn green. It's a really cool effect, right? Now we just have to adjust the numbers, going to the text tool and just selecting this and setting this to 2, pressing escape, 2, make sure nothing is selected again, and let's change this to 3. There we go. Now for the next part, we want to basically make sure that these number 2 and 3 will disappear and then number 1 will be highlighted. Let me run you through it. So starting off with number 2 and 3, I'm just going to select the shape layer 2 and shape layer 3, press P for position, set a keyframe by hitting the diamond icon and going a bit further, and then let's just move them both down, something like this. That's cool. Then I'm going to select all these layers, so including the icons and the text, pressing T for transparency, setting a keyframe, and make sure that the icons are also keyframed. I'm just going to drag these to the left and then setting the opacity here to 0. Basically what this will do, it will basically fade out once they go down, right? Maybe we can even adjust this a bit so it's a bit quicker. So selecting this, moving this more to the left. There we go. I'm going to fade it out even a bit quicker. That's cool. Now I want to highlight this number 1. And as you might have noticed, again, everything is linked to the shape layer number 1. So we can just move this and everything will move with it. So literally we can just set a keyframe by clicking this keyframe icon. I'm just going to select all of these and make sure that they're collapsed. It's a bit easier to see. Let's go a bit further. And then I'm just going to go to align, center. So it's centered. We can even move it down a bit. And then pressing S for scale, set a keyframe. And I'm going to drag this to the left and I'm going to scale it a bit, not too much, something like this. So basically we'll just move to the right and scale upright. Of course, we can select these, hitting F9 to ease it, and we have our animation. Looks really cool. Now for the next part, all the elements in the shape will fade out and the background will turn to black again and this text pops up. This text is literally just a position and opacity, and then it will do a hard cut back to the video. So let's animate that first. We're just gonna go into the shape, press U to see our keyframes, and one of our keyframes is colors. So what we can do is just select this keyframe, Command C on Mac, Control C on Windows, and then paste it, Control V on Windows, Command V on Mac. And then I'm just gonna do the same with the first keyframe. So also select that, copy that and paste it over. So it will basically go from green to black again. That's cool. Then of course select the number 1 and the mission icon, press T for transparency, set a keyframe also for the mission icon. And then we're just gonna fade these out. So going a bit further and then fading it out. So we'll fade out and change the color to black. Now again, for the text, like I said, it's literally just a position and an opacity. So we could just type text. We can just go to align, center, move it a bit down, holding shift and hitting the arrow keys. And then you can just press T for transparency, hitting a keyframe for this, dragging this out, setting it to 0 here, pressing P for position, dragging this out, and let's move this down. Press U to see our keyframes, and let's align this a bit better. And of course, select our keyframes, ease it, and motion blur. And let's just play this quickly. As you can see, really easy animation, but it does the job, right? Now to animate it out, I'm just gonna select all these layers. So the bottom shape layer 1 to the top icon and hitting Alt right bracket to cut it off. Now one trick is of course to also make sure that this shot is now different. So for example, we could scale this also, but even if you have a other take, that would even be better. So for example, here it ends here and then it snaps into place. That will make this transition make more sense. Anyway, let's continue to the icon animation. So again, looking at our example, we see this man icon popping up, this line animation, then the color of the icon changes. It moves over to the right. It will reveal all these other icons and these icons will go down one by one. Of course, I already prepared this, have a man icon. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to generate and gradient ramp. You can just search this. We can just double click it and let's change this start color to maybe like a bit of an off-white, something like this. There we go. And that's fine for now. Let's cut this off by holding Alt left bracket, and I'm just gonna animate it. So basically just pressing P for position, setting a keyframe, dragging this out and moving it down. I also think it's a bit too big, so press S for scale and let's drag this down a bit so it's a bit smaller, something like that. Then press T for transparency and let's drag this out, set a keyframe, set it to 0. So we'll fade in and move in like this. It's cool. Of course, easy ease it like always. And now let's animate the color. We can just go to the start color and end color, set a keyframe here in the left top, go a bit further, and then we can change it to anything we want. For example, we can change it to red or like a darker red, and then the bottom one also like a red, but like maybe even darker, something like this. Okay, and then it will basically with these keyframes change these colors. Now let's animate a line here. I'm just gonna grab the pen tool, make sure nothing is selected. Stroke is set to 3 pixels, that's fine. Make sure the fill is off by clicking on the word fill and setting it to none. Okay, and let's zoom in a bit by scrolling and holding space to move this around. And then I'm just gonna set a point here and let's just draw something, like setting a point here and holding my mouse down to make it a bit more smooth. Let's move this a bit. Let's adjust these a bit, maybe something like this, and then let's adjust this one too. There's always just playing around a bit, seeing what looks good. And this doesn't have to be perfect also because we're gonna go into this shape layer, into this contents, into the shape, into the stroke, and then clicking on the plus next to dashes. This will change it into dashes and it will also smooth it out a bit anyway. Now to animate this, I'm just gonna go to add trim paths, going into the trim paths and setting an end keyframe, and let's see where it changes color here. Let's move this a bit and let's drag this to 0%. Of course, we can easy ease this and we can add motion blur to make it more smooth. Now that's cool, but of course now we want to animate this. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna go to layer, new, null object. I'm gonna call this mover. I'm gonna select these both layers and link them to the mover. So you select these by holding shift, of course. Press P for position, set a keyframe, and let's move them over, go a bit further. And I'm just gonna drag this to the left. Basically so far that there's only a part of the line still visible, somewhere like here. That's cool. Now let's press U on our line and I'm just gonna see if we can align this a bit. So let's drag this out, let's ease this in, select these, hit F9. Let's play this real quick. It's cool. As you can see, the man icon doesn't have motion blur yet, so we're just gonna click on motion blur. There we go. And now let's set up the next scene. And basically we're just gonna import these icons. We have a money bag. Just gonna make this a bit smaller. It's a bit hard to see because it's black now. We're gonna change that in a bit. I'm gonna have another one of these maybe here. Then we have the helicopter. Press S for scale. Let's also drag this down. We have a house here. Let's scale this down a bit. Let's add another person icon. Let's scale this down a bit. And we also have the sports car. Let's also drag this in, move this down a bit. Right click, transform, flip horizontal. Let's move this a bit here. Now, as you might see, they're all black. We want them to be a specific color. And it's actually quite easy. We can just, for example, select our man first, go to effects and presets, adding a gradient ramp to this too. Can even adjust the gradient ramp location a bit, and then, for example, setting here to green, the start color to like a darker green. So green and then darker green, something like this. Okay. And then what we can do is just copy this over, Command C on Mac, Control C on Windows, selecting all the other icons by holding Command or Control on Windows, and then pasting it. And as you can see, we have all our gradients filled. Now, of course, we can add a deep glow to this, but basically what we can do now is parent this to the mover. Make sure motion blur is set to on by dragging this down. And because these are all linked to our mover, we can just go back, and as you can see, they will go out of frame. So this will be moved like this, and then these will come into frame. Now, to get them out of the frame, we also want that. I'm just going to select all these layers by clicking on the first one, holding shift, and clicking on the last one, pressing P for position, setting a keyframe. Let's go a bit further. And I'm just going to move them all down So I'm just gonna drag these down, hold shift to make sure that they go straight down. There we go. And then of course you can also select all these keyframes, easy ease it. And we can also offset it a bit. So for example, basically we can make these bags go first, for example, a bit of offset here, just making it a bit more random like that. So it doesn't all go at once. There we go. There we go. Now for the line, I'm just going to fade that out by pressing T, setting a keyframe and dragging this out and setting a keyframe, going a bit further and setting it to 0%. So we'll just fade out once these are down. Now, not the biggest fan on how they go down. I think it can go a bit smoother. We can still do that by just selecting these keyframes, going into the graph editor, zooming in a bit, and then make sure that these are a bit more smooth in the beginning. So basically take a bit of time and then they go down. Let's drag these out a bit. Cool. Now going to the next part, we have this really cool old camcorder effect. And I'm going to create this fully custom in After Effects. Now we can probably find something like this on the internet, but how cool is it if we can recreate this, right? And I'll also teach you this really cool expression you can use for it. So let's start with the frame first. So I'm just going to go to the rectangle tool. Make sure nothing is selected. Stroke 3 pixels is fine. Fill is set to off. We can just drag this out like this, something like this. And then let's align this. So go to align, make sure it's centered on both axes. Now just scroll to your shape, select it and make sure this is turned on. So the tool creates mask. And basically we can just create 2 masks, one here, set that to subtract, and one in the middle, and also set that to subtract. Now, as you can see, it's not perfect. Let's deselect this. It's a bit too long at the bottom. So we can just go to the mask one, go to the selection tool, double click on this mask, and let's drag this out a bit. So it's a bit more cut off, something like that. And basically, I think it should work like this. Let's see. There we go. Perfect. Now I'm also gonna set it to 4 pixels so it's a bit more thick so we can just see it a bit better. Now for the rec icon, I think this is really cool. We're just gonna go to the ellipse tool, set the fill to red, stroke we're gonna turn off. Okay, let's just drag this and hold shift. And now of course we can make it blink by going to T for the opacity, and then we can keyframe it manually. We're not gonna do that. I'm just gonna alt click on the opacity and pasting this expression. Now, of course, this expression is also in the free school community and you can use this on any layer that you want. So cool. So we now can just go to the text tool and type rec here. It's really that easy. Make sure that this is a bit smaller here. And then of course, duplicating this, holding shift, dragging this over to the right. And then you'll get something like this. Like I said before, if you want to get more clients as an editor, do join the pro community. Link is in the description down below. And you also learn how to become a pro editor. And of course, join a community with all these amazing editors that really want to help out. Let me know what you want to see next. Don't forget to subscribe, and then I'll see you next time. Bye.